The sky was gray that morning, like it knew what I was about to do. Rain whispered against the courthouse windows, a slow, rhythmic tap that echoed through the sterile silence of the marble halls. I stood there, wrapped in a beige trench coat, 2 sizes too big, watching ink bleed across the final page of a contract that didn't just take my name. It took my future. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, from the terrifying certainty that nothing after this moment would ever belong to me again. My name is Amelia Carter, 25, once a waitress, once a dreamer, now the legally bound wife of Julian Thorne, the man behind the pen, the fortune, and the ice-cold stare seated across from me. He didn't say a word as the notary flipped through the papers. His gaze didn't meet mine, his expression didn't shift, but I felt him watching, as if every slow breath I took was being silently assessed. Filed away in the vault of his mind, this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction, one I'd agreed to because my father's hospital bills were swallowing us alive, because the debt collectors had started banging on our front door, and because this man, this stranger, had offered me a lifeline. Wrapped in gold and steel, when I looked at Julian, I saw everything I wasn't. He was clean lines and cold precision. A tailored black suit clung to his broad shoulders like armor. His dark hair slicked back, his jaw cut from the same stone as his empire. He had the kind of face that didn't flinch, not at contracts, not at pain, not even at marriage to a woman he'd never touched. I was nothing to him, just a name on paper, a piece in whatever immaculate puzzle he was trying to build for his shareholders or his legacy. I'd overheard his assistant whispering about it. A marriage was good for image, for stability, for sealing a business merger, and I, apparently, looked the part. We didn't exchange vows. There was no kiss, no guests, just a lawyer, a contract, and a silence that seemed to stretch on forever, taut and unmerciful. And when it was done, Julian stood, adjusted his cuffs, and said with effortless finality, "We leave at 6, pack what you need, you won't be coming back here." That was the first thing he said to me, not hello, not you look beautiful, not even thank you, just a command, clean and dismissive. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, pretending I had any control left to lose. The car he sent for me was black, sleek and eerily silent. The windows were tinted, the driver didn't speak, and the world outside blurred into raindrops and regrets. I clutched my small suitcase on my lap like it held everything I was, the photo of my mother, my journal, the crumpled letter I'd written and never sent to the version of myself that still believed in love. When I arrived at his penthouse, I was escorted upstairs by a woman with a smile so practiced it didn't touch her eyes. She showed me to a room that overlooked the entire city, a skyline that felt impossibly far away. I stood at the window for hours, wondering what kind of life I'd just signed away, wondering if Julian had even noticed I existed beyond the signature on the dotted line. And then the evening came. The wedding dinner was served by staff I didn't know, on plates too expensive to touch. I sat at one end of a table long enough to separate us by a small universe. Julian sat at the other. He barely spoke, he didn't toast, he didn't ask how I was, he just watched, cold, calculating, as if waiting for me to slip, to show the con he believed I must be running. In his mind, I was surely some poor girl pretending to be pure, pretending not to want his money. But the irony was, I had never touched a man before, I'd never kissed someone and meant it, never fallen, never trusted, and tonight, that truth would break us open. He led me to the bedroom without a word, the weight of our silence like iron chains clinking between each step. The suite was vast, marble and velvet, the kind of place people only see in dreams or magazines. A city of glass glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. But all I could see was him, Julian, unbuttoning his cufflinks in the mirror like he was about to go to war. He turned slowly, his eyes sharp, assessing. "You think you're clever," he said quietly, voice low, cutting through the space between us like a knife. I froze, standing by the door, fingers still curled around the strap of my dress. "What? You wear that look like you're innocent, fragile, but I've seen it before. Girls like you pretending to be virgins so they seem more valuable, so the price goes up." My breath caught in my chest. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, not shame, not guilt, anger, a kind of humiliation that pulsed behind my eyes. But my voice came out barely a whisper. "I'm not pretending." That stopped him. The cold mask cracked for just a second, his eyebrows tightening. "What?" "I've never been with anyone, ever." Silence dropped like a stone between us. Julian blinked once, slowly, as if his mind was trying to reconfigure the entire blueprint he'd drawn of me. He turned away, raking a hand through his hair, pacing to the far wall. He didn't speak, and neither did I. The silence was deafening. Finally, he muttered, almost to himself, "You shouldn't have said that." I stepped backward, unsure if I was meant to leave, unsure if I'd just made things worse. My hands trembled as I reached for the bedpost to steady myself. "I'm not lying to manipulate you," I said quietly. "I didn't even want this. Any of this." He turned then, slowly, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something real, not fury, not disgust, not even disbelief. Just a man who didn't know what to do with the truth when it didn't match. His cynicism. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, then walked to the door. "Get some sleep," he said. "You don't have to pretend anything for me," and then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door clicked shut, still wrapped in the ivory gown that had never felt like mine, in a room that didn't feel like home, in a marriage that wasn't built on love, or choice, or even kindness. But in that final look before he left, that stunned, quiet pause, I saw something I hadn't expected. Julian Thorne, the untouchable billionaire, had been shaken. And somewhere beneath the cold exterior, I wondered, was there a man buried under the machine? I didn't know what came next, but I knew the ground had shifted, the contract bound us. But the truth had cracked something open. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. The morning after our wedding began in a silence that felt heavier than words. I woke to the soft groan of sunlight stretching across cold marble floors, the scent of citrus-scented linen clinging to the air. The room was immaculate, untouched, as though I hadn't slept here at all, but I had, alone, still wearing the remnants of a dress that wasn't mine, in a bed that might as well have been carved from ice. My body ached not from any touch, but from the tension that had woven itself into my bones since the moment I said yes. When the door opened, I braced myself. But it wasn't Julian. A woman with perfectly pinned hair and a neutral smile stood at the threshold. She bowed slightly, professional, distant. "Mr. Thorne requests you be ready in an hour. The car will take you both to the estate." That was all she said. No explanation, no room for questions, and I didn't ask. I simply nodded and shut the door again, the words "the estate" echoing in my mind like a summons I didn't understand. By the time I dressed and stepped into the foyer, Julian was already waiting, leaning against the wall like it belonged to him, which it probably did, wearing a pale gray suit that softened his sharpness but did nothing to make him feel more human. He glanced up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "We'll be there before dark," he said. No good morning, no comment on my appearance, just a fact, dropped like a stone. I followed him without a word. What else was there to say? The drive took hours. The city bled into the countryside, buildings replaced by fields, glass replaced by sky. I stared out the window, pretending not to notice how close he sat beside me, pretending I didn't feel every pulse of tension that lived between us. Julian didn't speak once. Not when we passed the coast, not when we crossed into hills so green they felt stolen from dreams. He just stared ahead, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, something that lived beyond the glass and steel of his world. But I noticed the way his hands tightened on the wheel every time I shifted in my seat, as if my presence still unsettled him, but not in the way it used to. We arrived just as the sun began to fall behind the clouds. The estate rose like a secret out of the trees, grand and gray, with ivy crawling up its stone walls and windows that gleamed like secrets. It wasn't ostentatious. It was old, regal, haunted by stories I hadn't heard yet. The gates opened without a sound. Inside, everything smelled of wood polish and time. I was shown to a room larger than the apartment I'd grown up in, with soft golden curtains, a fireplace waiting for flame, and a view of rolling vineyards stretching toward the mountains. I should have been awed, but all I felt was displaced. Like a ghost wandering someone else's life, I unpacked slowly. A few dresses, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, the photo of my mom and dad on their wedding day. I set it beside the bed, needing something real in a world that felt too polished to breathe in. And then he came to the doorway. He didn't knock. He didn't step inside. He just stood there, arms crossed, gaze scanning the room, or maybe scanning me. I turned, startled by the way his presence shifted the air. "You don't belong here," he said. The words weren't cruel, but they hit like stones. I froze, the photograph still in my hands. My heart stung at his bluntness, and for a moment I thought he'd come to send me away. "Then why am I here?" I asked, not meekly, not in tears, but with a thread of defiance I hadn't realized I was still capable of. I met his gaze, steady. He blinked once, slowly, and the tension between us changed shape. "Less sharp, more curious, because I misjudged you," he said, the words low and deliberate. "And I don't make mistakes twice." He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and disappeared down the hall. I stood there for a long moment, still holding the photo, still reeling from the fact that Julian Thorne, the man who treated emotions like weaknesses, had just admitted he was wrong, not in so many words, but enough. Dinner was at 8, that's what he'd said before he left. I had no idea what appropriate meant in a house like this, so I picked the most modest black dress in the closet, tied my hair into a loose knot, and stepped into shoes. I wasn't sure I could walk in. When I entered the dining room, Julian was already seated. The room was lit by a chandelier that seemed to float. The table stretched like a runway, covered in candlelight and silver, but there were no guests. Just him, just me. He didn't stand. He didn't smile, but his eyes did flicker. Just for a second, dinner was quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of cutlery and the distant hush of wind outside. I pushed food around my plate, overwhelmed by everything, the setting, the silence. The man watching me with unreadable eyes. "You're not eating much," he said at last, voice calm. "It's a lot," I replied, gesturing at the food, the table, the mansion, all of it. His brow lifted slightly, like my honesty surprised him. "I'm not used to this," I added. And my voice cracked. He set down his glass. "Neither was I once." It wasn't an invitation, but it was something. After dinner, he led me to the terrace. The night was cool, stars spattered across the sky like confessions. I leaned against the railing, grounding myself in the cold stone. Julian stood beside me, his warmth a presence I couldn't ignore. I didn't mean to ask, but the question came anyway. "Why did you agree to this?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. "Convenience," he said finally. "A wife looks good on paper, investors like stability." It hurt, the way he said it, like I was a business card. But I pressed on. "And me? Was I just convenient too?" He looked at me, then really looked. "No," he said softly, "you were a surprise." I didn't breathe for a full beat, just stood there, heart hammering, wondering what kind of surprise he meant. The kind that ruins everything, or the kind that changes everything? He stepped away first, retreating into the house, but the echo of his words stayed with me. "You were a surprise." And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that meant. The morning air tasted different in the countryside, cleaner, sharper, like it hadn't been filtered through exhaust pipes and skyscraper windows. I woke to birdsong and the soft knock of footsteps in the hallway. Not city sirens or late-night arguments bleeding through thin walls. The bed, still foreign to me, was wrapped in ivory linen so smooth it felt like clouds, and for the first time in days, I didn't wake with panic pressing against my chest. The room was warm, safe, but I was still alone. Julian had disappeared sometime during the night. Or maybe he'd never come back at all. I dressed simply, a cotton blouse I'd found folded in a drawer, soft blue jeans that still had the store tag tucked inside the pocket, and stepped into the hallway like a girl trying not to be noticed. In someone else's dream, the estate was quiet, too quiet, like it was waiting for someone to speak first. I wandered room by room. I passed silent sitting areas, staircases that split like rivers, and walls lined with books behind glass. Each space felt like it had been touched and then abandoned, grand but untouched. Alive, but only halfway. Then I saw it, a door at the far end of a corridor, old, wooden, slightly ajar. Curiosity overruled caution. Beyond it lay something unexpected, a garden. But not the kind trimmed by staff or preened for guests. This one was tucked behind stone walls, wild with vines, roses blooming between cracks, sunflowers leaning too far toward light. It looked forgotten, but alive, unapologetically so. The scent of lavender and earth made something inside me soften. Made me forget I was living someone else's story. I stepped in. It was quiet in a way that calmed me instead of silencing me. No marble, no grandeur, just soft petals and unruly growth. I reached out to touch a rose when I heard him. "You found it?" Julian's voice. I turned, startled. He stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, jacket gone. Eyes unreadable, but not angry, not cold. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said, stepping inside. "She would have liked you here, she?" I asked. "My mother." The words hit me like a gentle wave. Julian never spoke of family. In every room we'd shared, he'd guarded himself like a fortress. But now, he was letting something show. "She planted all of this," he said, looking around. Said the garden was the only place no one expected her to be anything, just her. I watched him walk to a crumbling bench near the edge of the stone path. He sat, exhaled slowly. "She died when I was 17, he continued, voice quieter now. "Cancer, fast, unforgiving." I stayed still, letting him say it without interrupting. "She loved wildflowers," he added, almost smiling. Said order was overrated. That life wasn't meant to be trimmed and shaped to please other people. "That's beautiful," I said softly, stepping closer. He looked up at me, and something passed between us. Not just emotion, but understanding. "I haven't been back here in years," he admitted. "Not since." His voice trailed off. Without thinking, I lowered myself onto the bench beside him. We sat there in silence, the way people do when they know words won't fix anything. Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I used to come here when my father was at his worst," he said after a moment. "She'd find me under that tree." He nodded toward a crooked oak standing proud in the corner. She'd say, let them think the world is made of contracts and conquest, we know better. A laugh escaped me, unbidden sounds. Like she was very different from him, he turned to look at me, and for the first time, his eyes didn't carry suspicion, they carried memory. She was everything he wasn't. I wanted to ask more about his childhood, about what kind of boy he'd been before becoming the man who made girls sign their lives away. But I didn't. Some truths needed to arrive in their own time. Instead, I reached down and plucked a broken tulip stem from the dirt, brushing it gently with my fingers. Julian watched me closely. You like this place, he said. I do. He nodded, standing slowly. Then it's yours. What? This garden, keep it. Do whatever you want with it. It's not much use to anyone else. I looked around, overwhelmed. You're giving me your mother's garden? He paused. I'm trusting you with it. It was the first time he'd used that word. Trust. The sun shifted behind the clouds, casting soft shadows across the stones. And I knew something had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that mattered. Later that day, I returned with gloves and clippers I found in a shed. I trimmed the roses gently, watered the roots, planted a seed from a tiny paper packet I'd been saving since before I ever knew Julian Thorne existed. When I looked up, he was watching from the window. He didn't wave, but he didn't walk away either, and that was enough. Because in the quiet of his mother's garden, the man who built a life on power was beginning to let something grow. Not flowers. Not forgiveness. But maybe something closer to faith. It began with thunder in the distance, the kind that rolls low across the sky like a secret preparing to reveal itself. By the time the first drops fell, the estate was cloaked in gray, the sky heavy with something unspoken. I had been sitting in the garden again, knees tucked beneath me, hands stained with soil. The scent of wet earth and roses lingered in the air as I hurried back through the halls, heart beating in rhythm with the storm. I found shelter in the library. It was a cavernous room I'd passed by a dozen times, never quite daring to step inside. But that afternoon, it welcomed me like a sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling shelves cradled books that looked older than time itself, their spines worn, their pages yellowed with memory. A fire crackled in the hearth, painting the leather furniture with dancing light. I sank into one of the armchairs, the weight of the storm outside matched only by the quiet unfolding inside me. I chose a book without thinking, some forgotten novel, with a faded green cover, and let my fingers trail the words. But my mind kept drifting, not to the plot, not even to the storm, but to him. Julian. The man who had said almost nothing to me over dinner the night before, but who had given me his mother's garden without blinking. The man who watched me more than he spoke. The man who'd called me a surprise. A flicker of heat bloomed across my chest, confusing and fragile. I didn't hear the door open, only the shift of the air warned me. I looked up. He was standing there. Rain clung to his hair. His white dress shirt was damp, clinging to the hard lines of his chest. He looked less like a billionaire and more like something out of a dream. Someone had forgotten how to wake up from. You're here, he said, almost surprised. I swallowed. It's cozy. He stepped further into the room, brushing rain from his sleeves. It was my mother's favorite. She used to sit in that chair with a blanket and a cup of mint tea. You've said a lot about her, he nodded, moving to the fireplace. She was the only part of this house that ever felt alive. He didn't sit, just stood there, watching the flames. I closed the book in my lap, placing it on the side table. You talk about her like she's still here. Julian's jaw tightened. She is. In every room my father tried to strip of softness, she left something behind. There was something in his voice, a weariness I hadn't heard before. Not anger, not arrogance, just exhaustion. What was she like? I asked gently. He turned toward me, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. But then, kind, he said. Too kind for the world she married into. She thought she could soften it. She couldn't. I rose from my seat slowly, walking toward the tall window where the storm painted streaks across the glass. I didn't know what I was doing, only that something inside me needed to move, to be closer, to not sit in silence while the man across the room fought ghosts I couldn't see. I used to love storms, I said quietly. They made everything feel raw, honest, like the world was wiping itself clean. He joined me at the window. Close. But not too close. Alive, he said, repeating the word like it was foreign. When I turned to face him, he was already watching me. His eyes weren't cold this time, they were filled with something else. Something I couldn't name but felt deep in my skin. You make things feel that way, Clara, he said. My name, spoken gently, deliberately, felt like a vow. My breath caught. What do you mean? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from my cheek. The touch was featherlight, but it set off fireworks in my chest. I don't know yet, he whispered. But I'm starting to want to find out. For a moment, everything stopped. The rain, the fire, the uncertainty between us. Then he stepped back. The moment broke, but not in a way that shattered. More like something waiting to be continued. He moved toward the door, hand on the frame. "I'll have someone bring you tea," he said, not looking back. It's how she liked it. And then he left. I stood alone, the fire casting flickers of warmth against my skin, the storm wrapping the world in gray, but inside, something was beginning. Something that had nothing to do with contracts or appearances or convenience. Something that had everything to do with the man who had begun as a stranger and was slowly, impossibly, becoming real. The storm passed sometime before dawn. I woke to a stillness so complete it made me question whether the thunder the night before had ever truly happened. But the scent of rain-soaked earth still lingered. And the memory of Julian's hand brushing my cheek felt too vivid to be a dream. I didn't see him at breakfast, but I didn't expect to, still. The absence hung heavy in the room like smoke from a fire that hadn't fully gone out. The tea had arrived exactly as promised, mint, steeped just long enough, served in a porcelain cup painted with wildflowers. A quiet message left without words, he remembered. Later that morning, I wandered the estate aimlessly. It was too large for solitude and too quiet to be comforting. The house seemed to echo with things left unsaid. I passed the drawing room, the study, the garden doors. My fingers trailed along the carved banister of the staircase as I descended toward the west wing, led more by instinct than curiosity, and that's when I heard it, the sharp, sudden clang of hooves against stone. A voice shouted. A gate creaked, then silence. I rushed toward the sound, following the corridor until it opened into a courtyard I hadn't seen before, wide and open, bordered by tall hedges and stables built from aged stone. One of the stable doors was swinging open, and beyond it, a chestnut horse bolted out in a panic, reins flailing, and standing calmly in its path, Julian. He moved without panic, stepping forward with confidence, his hand outstretched, voice low and firm. "Easy," he murmured, "easy now." The mare skidded to a halt just feet from him, nostrils flared, eyes wild. He reached out, slowly, gently. And she let him. I stood frozen by the hedges, watching him stroke her mane, murmuring things I couldn't hear. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The same man who'd made me sign a marriage contract with a stare cold enough to freeze time was now speaking to a terrified animal like she was something sacred. He saw me. I didn't try to hide. He smiled, just a flicker, but it was real. "Clara," he called, stepping aside to guide the mare back toward the stable. "You're up early. You're not exactly sleeping in yourself," I replied, walking toward him cautiously. The scent of hay and rain thickened the air. He gave a soft chuckle. "She spooks easily. Storms make her nervous." I reached out tentatively and brushed my fingers against the horse's flank. She was warm and breathing fast, but steady. "You're good with her," I said. "She trusts me." His tone was simple, not proud. "It took time. She's lucky." His eyes met mine then, deep, searching. "So am I." My breath caught. I looked away first. "You ride?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not even once." He nodded slowly, then turned toward the tack room. "That's about to change." Before I could protest, he was already preparing the saddle. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd led the mare to the open paddock and held out his hand. "Come on, she's gentle. I'll walk beside you." I hesitated, fear prickling along my skin. Not of the horse, but of him, of what he was doing to me. But I placed my hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and steady as he helped me mount. The saddle felt strange, the height intimidating, but he didn't let go. He walked beside me as promised, guiding the mare with practiced ease. I sat stiffly, terrified I might fall, but he kept his hand on the reins. His voice soft and constant. "Relax your legs, let her feel you." I nodded, trying to breathe. We circled the paddock twice before he stopped her gently and turned to face me, one hand resting on her bridle. "You're doing better than I did my first time," he said. "Hard to imagine you being bad at anything." A shadow crossed his face, something between amusement and regret. "You'd be surprised." I looked down at him. The wind moved his hair, softening the edges of his usually immaculate image. "I don't know what I'm doing here," I said quietly, "with you, with this." Julian's hands tightened slightly on the leather. "Neither do I," he said. "But I'm starting to want to." He stepped back and reached up to help me down. As I slid off the saddle, my body tilted forward and I stumbled slightly, straight into him. His hands caught my waist instinctively, and for a breath, neither of us moved. His grip lingered. So did mine. We were inches apart, and this time, neither of us pulled away. "Julian," I whispered. He didn't speak, just looked at me the way he had the night before, like I was something he couldn't quite name, but wasn't willing to let go of either. Then slowly, deliberately, he released me, but the space between us still pulsed like something alive. We walked back to the estate side by side. No touches, no promises. Just silence that felt less like emptiness and more like the start of something being built one breath At a time. And in the stillness of the garden, as the sunlight broke through thinning clouds, I realized something profound. This wasn't love, not yet, but it was no longer obligation. No longer a cage. It was a first touch, the kind that lingers in your skin long after the hand has gone. And my heart, still cautious, began to beat a little louder. Some places in the house whispered louder than others. The halls near the east wing creaked differently beneath your feet. The old piano room always smelled faintly of violets. And the corridor beyond the library, the one with the faded portrait of a woman with Julian's eyes, held a kind of hush that felt sacred. That morning, I found myself wandering there. Maybe I was searching for quiet, maybe I was following the echo of his voice from last night. Or maybe I was just looking for something real in a house still full of shadows. A door at the end stood half open, dust filtering through the sunlight. Like memory, it was a small sitting room, lined with faded wallpaper and velvet chairs worn thin. Not grand, not polished, just honest. The kind of room that hadn't been touched in years but still remembered being loved. On a shelf, tucked in the corner, half hidden behind some old letters, sat a wooden box. Ornate but aged, carved with initials, AT. I didn't touch it at first. But something about it called to me, not greed, not curiosity, just something instinctual. A knowing. When I finally did lift the lid, it creaked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Inside were letters. Old, folded, yellowed around the edges. One was addressed to Julian, the others bore no names, just dates, and the unmistakable handwriting of someone who had once believed words could hold a person together. Clara, his voice cut through the air. I spun around. He was standing in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, expression unreadable. His gaze flicked from the box to my face. I didn't mean to snoop. He walked in slowly, eyes locked on the letters. I thought it was lost, he said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. I stepped back. I shouldn't have touched it. He didn't respond right away, just reached for one of the envelopes and turned it over in his hand like it was glass. She wrote these in the last year of her life, he said, when she knew she was dying. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I even breathed. She didn't tell me at first, thought I was too young to carry it. His lips tightened. But I wasn't. I'd already been carrying everything else. He sat on the arm of the chair, elbows on his knees, and held one of the letters in his hand without opening it. I was 17. My father was worse by then, cold, obsessive. She used to say this house was his trophy case, not a home. His voice cracked slightly on that word, home. She wrote me these to remember the parts of her she couldn't give me when he was watching. I lowered myself onto the opposite chair, careful, as if the moment might shatter if I breathed too hard. I didn't know, I whispered, most don't. We sat in silence, the kind that only exists between two people who have stopped pretending. Julian finally looked at me, his eyes tired but soft. You asked me once why I chose this. The contract, the arrangement. I nodded. He held up the letter. Because love never saved anyone in this house. It got buried, smothered, erased. My chest ached. So you stopped believing in it. I stopped trusting it. I didn't ask the next question. He answered it anyway. Yes, he said quietly. There was someone, a long time ago. He stood, pacing slowly toward the window. The sunlight caught the angles of his face, but it didn't warm them. She said all the right things, promised the world, but it was all part of a deal, a merger between families. She left the minute it fell through, and you haven't let anyone in since, I said gently. He turned toward me. I made a rule. I don't fall. I don't trust. I build walls so high no one can climb over them. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Until me, he exhaled. You weren't supposed to mean anything, a name on a contract, a placeholder. He stepped closer, slowly. But you weren't a placeholder, Clara. You were the breach in everything I thought I'd secured. I stood now, too. The space between us was less than breath. I never asked to be here, I said, voice shaking. But I'm here, and I'm not trying to fix you, Julian. I just want to understand. His hand lifted, slow, hesitant, and touched my cheek again, not like the first time, this time. It stayed. You make me want to be understood, he said. And that's terrifying. I closed my eyes, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to remember the moment exactly as it was, the fire, the letters, the rawness of a man unlearning everything he thought made him strong. And for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt like it had finally exhaled. The days that followed blurred into something softer. The air in the estate felt different now, lighter, like the walls had stopped holding their breath. Julian still didn't speak much, but his presence had shifted. He'd linger at the garden gate while I worked, pause beside me at breakfast. With a quiet, did you sleep well? Small gestures, barely their glances, but they were bridges. Thread by thread, we were weaving something neither of us had names for yet. Then, one morning, he was gone. I woke to find his side of the house silent, his coffee cup sat untouched, his coat missing from the hall. I asked the housekeeper where he'd gone into the city. A business meeting, she said, eyes kind but unreadable. He'll be back before nightfall. But night fell, and he didn't return. I told myself not to overthink it, that this was normal. That Julian had been vanishing for days before I ever stepped into his life. Still, I sat by the window long after the fire burned low, my eyes tracing headlights that never turned down the estate road. I missed him. The admission was quiet. Startling, I missed him, not the man who signed contracts in silence, but the one who stood beside me in the rain, who handed me letters written by his dying mother, who'd let me ride beside him and smile like it cost him something. I tried to read. I tried to sleep, but instead, I wrote a letter meant for no one, meant only to put words to the ache I didn't know how to say out loud. Julian, I don't know what you're doing to me. Or what I'm becoming in your presence, but I'm not pretending anymore, and I think you're not either. If this is a dream, I hope it never ends, and if it's a cage, I hope you lost the key. I folded it, tucked it inside the book I'd been reading. I didn't intend to give it to him, but fate, I would soon learn, has a strange way of intervening. The next evening, a car door slammed outside. I rushed to the foyer just as Julian stepped inside. His coat damp with rain, hair tousled, eyes bloodshot from hours of exhaustion or something deeper. You're back, I said before I could stop myself. He looked up, startled, and something in his expression shifted the second he saw me. He crossed the distance between us in seconds, not rushed, not calculated, urgent. Read it, he said, breath ragged. My heart stuttered. Read what? He pulled something from his coat. The book. The one I'd left in the drawing room. The one with the letter inside. I wasn't supposed to see it, he said, voice lower now, like we were the only two people in the world, but I did. My cheeks burned. I reached for the book, embarrassed, already forming an apology, but he caught my wrist gently. No, don't take it back. His eyes searched mine, relentless. You meant it? Every word. I nodded slowly. I've spent years building walls so no one could get close. Women wanted the money, the name, the power, but you, his voice cracked, you handed me your truth, and I didn't deserve it. You still do. I whispered. For a second, I thought he'd kiss me. Instead, he pulled me into an embrace so fierce, so real, I forgot how to stand on my own. I left yesterday thinking distance would protect us both, he said into my hair. But all it did was show me how wrong I've been. He pulled back, eyes shining. No more walls, Clara. No more silence. I want this. I want us. I couldn't speak. So I did the only thing I could. I placed my hand on his cheek, felt the stubble beneath my palm, the warmth, the vulnerability. I want us to, I whispered. And that was the first time Julian kissed me. Not like a man claiming a prize, but like someone who had found something sacred in a world that had taught him everything was disposable. It wasn't a goodbye. It was the beginning of us. The kiss didn't change everything. It didn't erase the contract. It didn't rewrite the past, but it shifted something that couldn't be undone. In the days that followed, the rhythm of our world changed, slowly, tenderly. Like two people learning how to walk without stepping on each other's scars. There were no declarations, no speeches about love, but the silences softened. The glances lingered longer. The rooms we walked through no longer felt haunted by what we weren't saying. Julian smiled more. Not often, but enough. He joined me in the garden one morning, kneeling beside me in the soil with his sleeves rolled up and a hesitant look on his face. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, picking up a trowel like it might bite him. You don't have to, I said, pressing seeds into the ground. Just be here, and he was. That was the thing about Julian, he never gave halfway. He didn't know how. If he was present, he was all there, focused, fierce, quietly protective. Like the next day, when I cut my hand on a thorn and waved it off as nothing, he saw the blood. The way I tried to hide it. He didn't lecture, he didn't scold, he just took my wrist gently, walked me into the kitchen and cleaned the cut himself, silently, carefully. Like I mattered. Like he'd never let me bleed alone. That night, I found him in the hallway outside the study, staring at a painting I hadn't noticed before, a watercolor of the garden, but before time had unraveled it. Wild roses everywhere, color exploding across the canvas. She painted it, he said without turning. My mother, it's beautiful, she said. The garden was where she remembered who she was. Before him, before the contracts and the perfect dinners and the suffocating expectations. He turned to me, his gaze softer than I'd ever seen it. Maybe that's what you are too, he said. A place where I remember who I was before all of this. He didn't mean the house, he meant the walls he'd built. The life of armor and silence he'd mistaken for safety. That night, for the first time, he didn't retreat to his side of the house. He followed me up the stairs. He stood in the doorway of my room like he didn't quite trust himself to step inside. You don't have to, I said, voice low. I want to. He didn't touch me. Not in the way I thought he would. Instead, He sat beside me on the edge of the bed and took my hand. Like it was an anchor. We talked about things we hadn't dared to before. He told me about the night his mother died. How she'd made him promise not to become like his father. How he had in every way that mattered until now. I told him about my childhood. About counting coins for grocery runs. About the way fear could become a habit. And then, without asking, he laid down beside me, fully dressed, his hand still in mine. I can't sleep, he said, not unless I know you're still here. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. I didn't dream that night. But I woke with his arms still wrapped around me and the morning light painting us both in gold. In the weeks that followed, we built something real. We laughed. He teased me for overwatering the lavender. I rolled my eyes when he ordered 5 different kinds of tea just to figure out which one I actually liked. He brought me pastries from the city, still warm in their paper bag. I slipped notes into his briefcase when he left for meetings, stupid jokes, small sketches of the garden. I never saw him read them. But he always came home with a soft look in his eyes. One evening, we danced. No music. No reason. He found me in the living room reading, held out his hand and said, "Come here." I followed. He spun me once, awkwardly. We laughed. Then he pulled me close, one hand on my waist, the other cradling the back of my head like I was fragile and fierce all at once. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a contract anymore. It wasn't survival. It was love, growing quietly, steadily. In the space we'd cleared for it, the mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home. Because wherever he was, with his silences, his stumbles, his surprising smiles, I felt safe. And I'd never known what that truly meant until him. It was a Saturday when Julian asked me to come with him. No explanation. Just a quiet "be ready by 10" and a kiss pressed to my forehead. While I was still blinking away sleep, I didn't ask questions. Not anymore. With Julian, sometimes the silence said more than words ever could. The drive was long. Winding roads, golden hills. The kind of countryside that looked like it had been painted just for us. Julian didn't speak much, but he reached over and laced his fingers through mine halfway through the drive. And that one gesture held everything we didn't say out loud. We pulled up to a small gate nearly hidden by ivy. Beyond it, a cottage stood nestled among trees and wild grass, not grand, not immaculate. Just peaceful, like it belonged to someone who had chosen quiet over applause. He parked and got out, walking ahead of me as the breeze rustled through the trees. This was hers, he said, turning back as I followed. My mother's, before the marriage. Before she gave it all up for a man who promised too much and delivered too little. I looked around, letting the calm seep into my skin. It's beautiful. I haven't brought anyone here in years. He unlocked the front door with a key worn smooth by time inside. The air smelled like old cedar and forgotten memories. Dust floated through slanted light. A fireplace, a tiny kitchen, shelves lined with books and records. It felt untouched, sacred. I used to come here after she died, he said, voice low. It was the only place where I didn't feel like I was pretending. He crossed the small living room and opened a drawer in a cabinet I hadn't noticed. When he turned back to me, his expression had changed. He held a small box in his hand, not velvet, not flashy, just simple and quiet and real. My breath caught. I didn't choose you that first day. He began. I didn't even know how. I was still a man ruled by logic, image, control. He stepped closer. But now every day I choose you. Not because of a contract, not because you saved my image, but because without you, none of this means anything. He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not the one I wore from the wedding we never celebrated. This one was delicate, thoughtful. A single diamond that shimmered like the first light of morning. My hands flew to my mouth as tears filled my eyes. I want a real beginning with you, he said. A real promise, no papers, no lawyers, just us, as we are. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. I nodded, my tears slipping down as he slid the ring onto my finger. It was warm from his hand. A perfect fit. I looked up at him, at the man who once treated marriage like a transaction and now stood before me trembling with emotion. He no longer feared. I choose you too, I whispered. He pulled me into his arms. Forehead resting against mine. No kiss. Not yet. Just breath. Just stillness. Just the quiet miracle of love reclaimed. That night, we sat on the porch of the cottage watching the stars rise. I leaned into his side, head resting on his chest, his fingers tracing slow patterns against my skin. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that I wasn't just in love with him, I was home. Not because he gave me a ring, but because he gave me the version of himself no one else had ever been allowed to hold. The real man. The one behind the name, the one who was finally ready to begin again with me. Autumn came like a quiet promise. Leaves rustled in warm golds and rust reds, the air crisp with change. The estate no longer felt like a fortress, the halls no longer echoed with silence. They sang now, softly, subtly, with laughter, footsteps, voices that lingered rather than passed. Julian was different too, not less intense, but softer in his edges, warmer in his silences. The man who once moved through rooms like he was made of granite now reached for my hand. As he passed, brushed my shoulder in the garden, smiled into his coffee in the mornings like it was a secret. Only we shared. He'd started talking more about his mother, her poetry, her stubbornness. The way she always insisted storms were necessary to wake us up. About his father, not in bitterness, but in honesty. As if saying it aloud gave him permission to step out of that shadow. About the boy he used to be. The man he feared becoming, and the man he was learning to be with me. I listened. And when the words ran out, I answered with stories of my own. The scar on my knee from a childhood bike fall. The way I used to pretend my pillow was a microphone. The letter I'd written to my future self at 14 that promised I'd never marry for money. We laughed about that one afternoon. I returned to the garden to find him there, not reading, not working, but planting. Hands dirty, sleeves rolled, knees in the soil. A patch of wildflowers was taking root beside the roses when he saw me watching. He stood and wiped his palms against his shirt, a sheepish smile on his face. You said you liked color, he said simply, and that was Julian. Now, still a man of few words, but every one of them meaningful, every one of them mine. Weeks passed, the cottage became a retreat we visited on weekends. The estate no longer echoed with ghosts, and my heart, once tight with fear, had bloomed into something I barely recognized. Peace. One evening, I found myself in the library again, curled by the fire with a journal half filled with sketches. Notes, memories too beautiful to trust to memory alone. Julian had been gone all day, meetings, he'd said, and the house had felt too large without him. When he returned, dusk had already kissed the windows. He entered quietly. His coat dusted with the first touch of winter, a small box in his hand. I sat up. Heartbeat stalling, he walked toward me, slower than usual, almost nervous. And Julian Thorne didn't do nervous. I was in the city, he said, sitting beside me, voice quiet. I had to get something. He opened the box. Inside was the contract. The one that had once chained us. He looked at me, gaze steady. I had it voided, legally dissolved. No more signatures, no more obligations. My eyes widened. Julian, he took my hand, fingers curling around mine. We don't need paper to keep us together. He said, we have something better. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a second item. A folded piece of paper. My original letter, the one he'd found in the book. I kept it, he said. Not because I needed proof of what you felt, but because it reminded me of the moment I stopped being afraid. Tears filled my eyes. He brushed one away before it fell. I love you, Clara. The words landed like a heartbeat. Strong, certain, undeniable, double quotes. I love you, I whispered back. He smiled, slow, devastating, real. The smile I'd come to crave. He kissed me then. Not like it was the end of something, but like it was a vow. A forever. We walked through the garden afterward, hand in hand. The wind danced between us, tugging at fallen leaves. The sun was a low amber glow on the horizon. At the edge of the garden, beside the fountain, he stopped. I've spent my life building an empire, he said, but none of it mattered until you. I leaned into him. You're not alone anymore, neither are you. We stood there as the stars blinked into being overhead, our silhouettes wrapped in golden light. There was no audience. No applause. Just the two of us. The man who had once trusted only contracts, and the woman who had taught him to believe in something more. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something real, of something earned, of a love that outgrew its own origin story and became something beautiful. Not by accident, but by choice, every single day. Forever. Together.